Inflammation is good. Without it, wounds would never heal, cell debris would accumulate from not being recycled, and we would succumb to bacterial and viral infections. However, if inflammation happens too often, known as chronic inflammation, then it's bad. Too much inflammation for long periods of time degrades tissue, causing organ destruction, and if bad enough, organ failure. To understand chronic inflammation, you first need to understand what inflammation is. Inflammation begins when cells are injured. Cells contain signal molecules called DAMPs, or damage-associated molecular patterns. Common DAMPs are histamine, uric acid, ATP, and heat shock proteins. When these molecules are inside the cell, an inflammatory response will not be triggered. However, if the cell membrane is damaged or the cell is compromised, these molecules will be released. Cells can be damaged by physical trauma, toxins, or infection by bacteria or viruses. In this example, let's say you got cut. Cells are sliced open and signal molecules are released. Outside the cell, they bind to receptors on immune cells, blood vessels, and nerve endings. When these three systems are activated, an inflammatory response is triggered. Signal molecules bind to immune cells called neutrophils, a type of white blood cell. Neutrophils travel to the injury site to clean up cell debris and attack bacteria that may have entered. One of the signal molecules released, called histamine, binds to H1 receptors on blood vessels. This causes the blood vessel to dilate, thus increasing blood flow to the injury site. This explains why inflamed tissue will swell up. Lastly, signal molecules bind to the nerve endings on nociceptors, which are neurons that transmit pain. When signal molecules bind to nociceptors, it makes them hyperactive, thereby enhancing the sensation of pain. Histamine is also a chemoattractant, meaning it attracts other immune cells to the site. One immune cell type it attracts in particular are called macrophages. Macrophages help clean up cell debris and bacteria by engulfing them and then dissolving with internal enzymes. After the site is cleaned up, macrophages release an anti-inflammatory protein called interleukin-10, which de-escalates the inflammatory response. Macrophages also release a tissue repair protein called arginase 1, which initiates reconstruction of the damaged tissue. Cells called fibroblasts deposit a thick structural protein called collagen to reconnect and secure damaged tissue, thus creating scar tissue to repair the wound. This is how a healthy and normal inflammatory response occurs. Cells are damaged, signal molecules are released in alert immune cells, the site is cleaned up, inflammation stops, and tissue is repaired. Inflammation becomes a serious problem when it doesn't stop like it should, and continues the cycle of cell damage and inflammation. You may be thinking, if injured tissue is repaired repeatedly, isn't that a good thing? While tissue repair is generally beneficial, repeated cycles of injury and repair can make the tissue less functional. This happens because specialized cells are gradually replaced by collagenous scar tissue. Organs derive their specialized functions from these specific cell types that constitute them. When these cells are reduced in number or their functionality is impaired due to excessive scar tissue, the organ may begin to malfunction. For example, your lungs have a high amount of an elastic protein called elastin, which is produced by lung cells. Elastin helps lung tissue to stretch, permitting your lungs to expand and contract. If lung tissue becomes chronically damaged from inhaling smoke, say from years of tobacco use, the body will induce an inflammatory response to repair it. As you know now, inflammation results in production of scar tissue. As more scar tissue builds up on the lungs, they become less elastic as lung cells are replaced with fibrotic scar tissue. This, of course, makes breathing very difficult. With that being said, what causes chronic inflammation in the body? The most common causes of chronic injury to tissue are lifestyle and autoimmune diseases. Lifestyle refers to activities or behaviors an individual does that affects their health. One prime example of lifestyle that causes chronic inflammation is excessive consumption of alcohol. Ethanol is the alcohol molecule found in drinks and is only mildly toxic. In the body, ethanol is sent to the liver where it's converted into acetaldehyde, which is later metabolized into acetic acid. Acetic acid is benign, but acetaldehyde is very toxic. Acetaldehyde is toxic because it can enter cells and attach to DNA in the nucleus, damaging its structure. When this happens, the cell detects the damage and releases a signal protein called TNF-alpha. This protein attracts neutrophils which attack the damaged cell and cause inflammation. Since the liver breaks down alcohol into acetaldehyde, it experiences the most inflammation. Scar tissue is deposited to reconstruct injured liver tissue. This explains why alcoholics end up with liver complications. They chronically consume alcohol, causing repeated cycles of inflammation and scarring. Injury and scar tissue become so widespread that they develop cirrhosis of the liver. For visual purposes, this is a healthy human liver. Notice there's no scarring, the surface is smooth, and the color of the organ is consistent. By contrast, this is the liver of an alcoholic. Notice the liver is covered in scars. Its surface is rough and the color is not consistent throughout. These raised bumps are called nodules. Nodules are clusters of liver cells that regenerated after the liver was damaged, but when they grew, they could not grow laterally with the surface of the liver. They were restricted by thick scar tissue. Instead, new liver tissue had to grow outward, developing as raised liver tissue or a nodule. Now, don't be afraid to drink alcohol. I myself have a couple of drinks a week. To really damage your liver, you would have to drink very heavily for years. However, let this be a reminder to you that alcohol is a toxin. Every time you drink it, you are deliberately causing inflammation in your liver. Just food for thought. Lifestyle factors can contribute to chronic inflammation, but a far more insidious and damaging cause lies in autoimmune diseases. In these conditions, the body's immune system mistakenly targets its own cells, treating them as if they were foreign invaders. The immune system identifies threats in the body using specialized proteins called antibodies. When the immune system encounters a pathogen for the first time, specialized cells called B cells process proteins from the pathogen and produce antibodies tailored to recognize it. These antibodies have specific binding sites that attach only to proteins from that particular pathogen. If the pathogen re-enters the body at a later date, the antibodies bind to it, triggering an immune response. In autoimmune diseases, specialized cells called B cells produce antibodies called autoantibodies. These autoantibodies have binding sites that attach to your own proteins in your organs. These proteins are found in organs such as the thyroid, pancreas, intestines, skin, and joints. When autoantibodies bind to these proteins, it triggers a similar immune response like it would a foreign bacteria. Immune cells attack organs that carry these proteins, inducing inflammation. During this inflammatory response, immune cells enzymatically dissolve proteins in your organs, causing tissue to be dissolved by your own body. Over many years, this chronic inflammation will degrade tissue and cause organ dysfunction. A prime example of this is rheumatoid arthritis. In rheumatoid arthritis, immune cells attack bone and cartilage in joints, degrading the tissue till joints cannot function. Tissue degradation is induced in other autoimmune diseases as well. In type 1 diabetes, immune cells attack the pancreas, preventing production of insulin. Celiac disease is where small intestinal tissue is targeted when gluten proteins activate an immune response. In multiple sclerosis, the central nervous system is attacked by immune cells. And in Hashimoto's disease, immune cells target the thyroid gland, causing a decrease in thyroid hormones. Thankfully, with advances in medicine, autoimmune diseases can be managed and even decreased. Drugs like Humira use antibodies that attach to signal molecules like TNF-alpha, so it can't bind to immune cells and attack the body. Rituximab is another immune therapy drug that affects B cells in your body. If you recall, B cells make the autoantibodies that attack your own cells. Rituximab is an antibody that binds to B cells and alerts the immune system to attack it. With fewer B cells, there are less autoantibodies being made, and thus lower levels of chronic inflammation. Remember, inflammation is good. We need it to prevent infection and clean up cell debris. However, chronic inflammation, whether it be from lifestyle, environment, or our own immune system, is very harmful. If left unaddressed, it can lead to tissue destruction and organ dysfunction. Thank you for watching Dark Science.